The distress beacon on the Ilvanari Grace had gone silent 4 minutes ago. Ambassador Theo Vantalis pressed her four-fingered hand against the shuddering bulkhead and watched, through the cracked viewport, as the Karguun raiding cruiser drifted closer like a shark scenting blood. Her ship's shields were gone, her weapons were gone. 61 civilians huddled in the cargo hold behind her, and every scan she ran told her the same brutal truth: no help was coming. The nearest Ilvanari fleet was 11 hours away. The nearest human colony, Ashfall Station, was supposedly friendly, but humans had never fought the Karguun. Nobody knew if they even could. Then the void split open. There was no warning flash, no hyperlane shimmer the sensors recognized. One moment there was empty starlight, the next, a shape the size of a small moon bled into existence, its hull the color of old iron, its running lights burning a cold, steady white. The Karguun cruiser's weapons officer would later swear, under interrogation, that for 3 full seconds his entire targeting array simply stopped working, as though the newcomer's mere presence had reached out and silenced it. A voice came over open comms, flat and calm, utterly unbothered by the death closing in on both ships. "This is the UNS Coventry Karguun vessel. You have 5 seconds to withdraw." The raiders did not withdraw. What happened in the next 90 seconds would be retold in 3 languages across 2 star systems, and Theo Vantalis, who had seen wars, coups, and the slow, grinding collapse of the Ilvanari Compact, would say it was the moment she stopped believing humans were merely clever animals playing at being a spacefaring people. But none of this had begun that way. 3 days earlier, nobody had even heard of the Coventry. Theo's assignment had been simple, on paper: escort a delegation of Ilvanari scholars to the border world of Kessis Prime to finalize a trade accord, then return home before the monsoon season closed the shipping lanes. The Ilvanari Compact was old, older than most of its neighbors' recorded history, and it had survived by being cautious, careful treaties, careful alliances, careful, measured contempt for the newer species clawing their way into galactic relevance. Humanity was the newest of these, and by far the strangest. They had appeared only 40 years ago, stumbling out of their home system with technology that was, by every civilized standard, embarrassingly primitive. No psionics, no gravitic drives worth mentioning. Their first contact protocol had reportedly involved a recorded greeting in 47 languages, and inexplicably, a golden record with music on it. The greater galactic community had filed humanity under harmless curiosities, and moved on. Theo had never given them a second thought, until Kessis Prime went dark. The trade envoy's ship had barely cleared the jump point, when Ilvanari sensors picked up the Karguun raiding fleet already in system, already burning toward the merchant lanes. The Karguun were not a nation so much as a plague with starships, stateless raiders who preyed on the weak seams between civilizations, striking where no treaty fleet could arrive in time. Kessis Prime, a quiet mining world with no orbital defenses to speak of, was exactly the kind of seam they loved. "Divert," Theo had ordered, watching 3 raider signatures swell on the tactical display. "We are not equipped for this." Her pilot, a nervous young Ilvanari named Saren, had looked at her with something close to despair. "Ambassador, if we divert the miners on Kessis, I know what happens to the miners." Her voice had cracked, just slightly. "I also know what happens to us if we stay." It was the kind of choice the Compact had trained its people to make without flinching. Preserve the delegation, preserve the accord, mourn the losses later in a properly composed memorial address. Theo had made harder calls before. She told herself this was no different. She was wrong, and she would not fully understand why until the Coventry arrived. What none of the Ilvanari knew, what almost no one outside a small human research consortium knew, was that the UNS Coventry had not come from Ashfall Station at all, and it had not been summoned by any distress call. It had been shadowing the Karguun fleet for 6 days. Captain Elena Vasquez-Aduba stood on the Coventry's bridge, arms folded, watching the raider formation on the strategic plot with the patient, cold attention of a woman who had spent 3 years hunting exactly this kind of enemy. Humanity's early encounters with the wider galaxy had taught them a hard lesson fast. The civilized powers wrote elegant treaties, and looked the other way when raiders bled the vulnerable border worlds no treaty covered. Nobody had asked humans to fix that. Humans had decided to fix it anyway. It was not glory that drove her. It was arithmetic. Every raid the Karguun completed funded 3 more. Every world left undefended became bait for the next attack. Elena's mission wasn't sanctioned by any of the great galactic powers. It existed in the gray spaces the powers didn't bother patrolling, chasing raiders the civilized fleets considered beneath their notice. "Captain," said her tactical officer, a broad-shouldered man named Priya Okonkwo Lindqvist, "Karguun fleet just changed heading. They're not going for the mining colony anymore." Elena's eyes narrowed. "Then what?" "There's an Ilvanari diplomatic transport in the system. Unarmed, unescorted. Looks like they're an easier kill than the colony's perimeter turrets." The bridge went quiet. Diplomatic transport meant civilians. It meant a species that, as far as Elena knew, considered humanity barely worth a formal greeting. "Doesn't matter who they are," Elena said. "Helm, intercept course. Weapons, spin up the forward array. We're not letting these people become an object lesson for anyone." Her first officer, a lean, sharp-eyed man named Marcus Feld, gave her a look she'd seen 100 times before. "Elena, the Ilvanari have made it pretty clear they don't want us anywhere near their affairs. If we save their envoy, and they still treat us like second-class curiosities, then we saved them anyway," Elena said. "That's the whole point, Marcus. We don't do this to be thanked." That wasn't even the biggest surprise waiting for her that day. The Karguun cruiser's captain, a scarred raider warlord named Gral Vosk, had fought humans exactly once before, years ago, in a border skirmish that his intelligence officers had chalked up to luck. Humans didn't have psionic disruption fields. Humans didn't have gravitic lances. By every metric his sensors could measure, the ship dropping out of the void in front of him was a lumbering, outdated hunk of iron that should have posed no threat at all. His weapons officer's board went dark before he even understood why. "Report," Gral snarled. "Sir, our targeting arrays they're just gone. Like someone reached in and pulled the wiring out." What the Karguun did not know, what almost nobody outside human military engineering circles knew, was that the Coventry was equipped with an experimental electromagnetic disruption suite that human scientists had spent a decade perfecting specifically because humans lacked the exotic weapons everyone else took for granted. If you couldn't outpunch your enemy, you took away their ability to punch at all. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't the kind of weapon the Ilvanari would have written poetry about. But it worked. The Coventry closed the distance in silence, its running lights the only warning, and opened fire with old-fashioned kinetic railguns the moment its disruption field went active. No psionics, no exotic drives. Just discipline, timing, and a willingness to get close enough to hurt. Theo Vantalis watched from the Ilvanari Grace cracked viewport as the raiding cruiser's engines flared, stuttered, and died. She had expected the human ship to be destroyed within the minute. Instead, she watched it dance through the Karguun's dying weapons fire, like it had rehearsed this exact fight 100 times. The truth stunned her more than she wanted to admit. Humans weren't primitive. They were improvising brilliantly with tools everyone else had dismissed as obsolete. The battle that followed was neither clean nor bloodless. 2 more Karguun ships arrived mid-fight, drawn by the distress calls of their crippled companion, and for 11 brutal minutes, the Coventry took hits that should have crippled her. A hull breach on Deck 7 killed 3 crew members outright, Corporal Aisha Reyes Whitfield among them, a woman who had transferred aboard only 2 weeks earlier, and whose last transmission had been a joke about the ship's terrible coffee. Elena heard the casualty report over comms, and did not let her voice shake, not once, though her knuckles went white on the armrest of her chair.
"Hold the line,"
she said. "We finished this." Nobody knew what the human ship was hiding until its final maneuver. A controlled ramming pass that clipped the second raider's engine housing hard enough to send it spinning into the third, but just enough time for the Coventry Dow's railguns to finish what the collision started. It wasn't a maneuver written in any galactic tactical doctrine. It was desperate, ugly, And it worked because Elena Vasquez Aduba refused to accept any outcome where the Ilvanari envoy died on her watch. When the Karguun fleet finally broke and fled into the void, the Coventry drifted, scarred and venting atmosphere from 4 separate hull breaches, alongside the trembling powerless Ilvanari Grace. Theo Vantalis opened a channel with hands that would not quite stop shaking. "This is Ambassador Theo Vantalis of the Ilvanari Compact." She stopped, composed herself, tried again. "I do not know how to thank a crew that owed us nothing." Elena's voice came back, tired, human, unmistakably real. "You don't owe us thanks, Ambassador. You owe the people who wanted you dead a lot less mercy than we're going to give them." That's all this was. There was a silence on the line that stretched long enough for Theo to hear, faintly, the sound of a human medical team working somewhere behind Elena's voice. The low murmur of people fighting to save each other, even as they'd just finished saving strangers. The Council had made a terrible mistake, Theo would later write in her formal report to the Compact, not in underestimating human weapons, but in underestimating human character. The Ilvanari had spent 40 years cataloging humanity's primitive drives and unremarkable psionics, and in doing so had missed the only statistic that actually mattered. Humans ran toward the people no one else would save, and stayed until the fight was finished, whether or not anyone was watching, whether or not anyone would ever say thank you. 3 weeks later, the Compact quietly revised its threat assessment of humanity from harmless curiosity to a designation that had never before been applied to a species so young. Ali, unconditionally Gral Vosk, held in an Ilvanari detention facility awaiting trial, was asked by an interrogator what he had learned from the encounter. He was quiet for a long moment before he answered. "I learned that the most dangerous thing in a galaxy isn't the species with the best weapons," he said. "It's the species that never learned when to stop caring." Somewhere beyond the reach of any treaty, any doctrine, any galactic power's notice, the UNS Coventry limped home under its own scarred power, unheralded, unpaid, and already listening for the next distress call no one else would answer. Aboard the Coventry, repairs took 9 days. Elena spent much of that time on Deck 7, where the breach had killed Aisha Reyes Whitfield and 2 others, standing in a corridor that still smelled of scorched metal. She waited until ship's night, until the corridors emptied, and only then let herself grieve properly, the way a captain owed her dead. Marcus found her there on the 5th night and sat beside her without a word. "You were right," he finally said. "About the Ilvanari, about all of it." "I wasn't trying to be right," Elena said quietly. "I was trying to make sure Aisha's death meant something." "It did," Marcus said, and for once there was no argument in his eyes, only tired respect. Theo Vantalis visited the Coventry in person before the ships parted ways. She walked the scorched corridors slowly, past a small shrine someone had built near Deck 7, 3 photographs and a handwritten list of names. "Your people do this after every battle?" she asked. "Every time we lose someone," Elena said. "Doesn't matter if the galaxy never hears their names. We do." Theo's voice lost its practiced diplomatic polish. "The Compact spent 40 years deciding what your species is worth to us. We should have asked what we were worth to you, and whether we deserved it." "You didn't have to deserve it," Elena said. "Nobody does. That's the whole point of showing up." When the Ilvanari Grace finally broke orbit for home, its ambassador watched the scarred shape of the Coventry shrink into the starfield behind them. Not with pity, not with condescension, but with something the Compact had no formal word for yet. Later, in her official report to the Ilvanari High Council, Theo Vantalis closed with a single line that outlived every treaty her species ever signed. "They did not come because the stars demanded it of them. They came because someone needed them to, and that, in the end, was reason enough